Okay, so here we are, midday on day 2, working our way through the gradual training and its monastics. This is, of course, this is useful stuff. The gradual training shows up a lot in the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle-length discourses, which are primarily geared towards the monks. And so the gradual training is like the blueprint for a monastic's practice, day-to-day activities, growth. You know, it's just figuring out how to get better in these categories. And many of the encouragements for monastics work their way, for monastics specifically, work their way towards the end of the gradual training. The practices of renunciation that are not necessarily, encouraged or even outlined for lay people. So this is something, it's really quite interesting in our modern day. The lay people get the opportunity to practice this way. Previously, you would just have to go and stay at the monastery and you shave your head or put on white or basically work in the kitchen and live there to be able to get something approaching this dedication to development. Because it's the development that leads to deep meditation. The gradual training, whenever the Buddha teaches it, he teaches the gradual training, and then he says they go and they sit at the base of a tree, they set their body upright, they put their mindfulness to the fore, and they go into the jhana. Because they've put in all the conditions for it, so why not? And jhana's samadhi, concentration of mind, is not a forceful activity, it's a conditioned activity. So you put in all the conditions so that you can let go, and you let go into deep meditation. And so the extra practices that come up, like I said, there's some moderation in eating, dedication to wakefulness, which is like limiting how much you sleep. But I like to think these get subsumed by the idea of contentment and what contentment means and how it's practiced and developed. And there was an elephant trainer at the time of the Buddha who said, he went up to the Buddha and he said, basically, animals are easy. You can be with an animal for about a day or so, and you will get to see every trick and deception it's capable of. And maybe Ocho threw you for a loop this morning, but basically the idea is they're simple and they're instinctive. So you can kind of suss them out really easily, and then they won't be able to trick you because they're always following their nature. But the elephant trainer said, but humans, you could be with a human being for 100 years and not see every deception they're capable of. And this is a reflection of our minds, the capability of our minds and the capability of delusion. So animals have a limited capacity for exhibiting delusion, because they're mostly just responding to stimuli. But people, with our minds, we can invent the most incredible delusions. One example, I think of a Mexican sort of parable, and it was about a donkey and his owner. And the owner would take the donkey back and forth selling supplies in neighboring towns. And specifically, the owner liked to pick up salt and sell it between the towns. And it was a heavy load for the donkey. And over the years, the donkey would just trudge along. It's like, wow, this is really heavy. It's hurting my back. Then one time when they were crossing a stream, the donkey lost its footing and it slipped. And part of the bags dunked in the water and got washed away. So when the donkey stood back up, he's like, whoa, that's much better. Because it was only half the weight. The next time they were making that trip, the owner was watching and the donkey intentionally slipped and dunked the bag in, and sure enough, it's half of it washed away. And so the owner's like, okay, yeah, I see what's going on here. And then the next trip, the owner bought a load of sponges. And so when the donkey did the exact same thing, but when he stood back up, the weight of the load was double instead of half. And that corrected the donkey's behavior instantly. It's just, okay, he's not going to do that anymore because I'm on to him. And that's sort of how our minds work in response to stress. And stress is a totally adequate translation for the word dukkha. So you put a little pressure on somebody. You put a little pressure on a human body, you get flatulence, but put a little pressure on the mind, and you get the mental equivalent of flatulence, which is just delusion. They come in late, they come in early, they leave late, they leave early, they walk through the hall, they make a cup of tea, they help themselves to the brownies in the refrigerator. We've been in monastery, and so it's not just on retreat. You get to see this every single day in a monastery. And why is this? Because people have a little bit of pressure put on them just by the first 3 stages of the gradual training. And that's the training, and that's why the Buddha used that simile of the wild colt. Is the very first thing you try and do, you try and put the colt in a pen. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be a shock. And so it's going to resist and it's going to struggle. To say nothing of, putting a bit in its mouth or putting a saddle on its back. So you do these things gradually. And likewise, when we're training the mind, we do these things gradually. And we trust that they're developing. So learning all of the monastic rules, for instance, there are 227 rules for a bhikkhu and 10,000 minor observances. And you can't learn them all. It's just like I've cycled through and I forget ones that I started on before I get to the end of the list. But you can develop a life that falls within the scope of them. And then you don't have to know all the rules. And likewise with practitioners, you can develop a way of being that falls within the scope of the training you're trying to put the mind through, and then get to a point where you don't have to think about it. You're like, okay, practice means this. At the beginning of the session, you sit down. When the bell rings, you get up. In between that, whatever's arising, you're noticing it. And this is, it's not, a lot of monasteries and retreat centers become kind of really painful institutions because of a reaction to what happens when you put pressure on people. You get all of these delusions come out. And as teachers, it's a constant kind of, okay, that's right. I was like this too when I first showed up. This is normal. This is normal. This is part of the development. And it doesn't last forever, because eventually a person starts to see if they act within a certain channel, there is no pressure. Yeah? And so when we get to the idea of contentment, it's a sort of multifaceted program, because it's entirely possible that when you sit down on the cushion, you're just going to be okay with what's going on. You won't have any complaints, and then right into samadhi, no problem. But it might be that you sit down and it's too hot, or it's too cold, or you're too hungry, or you're too full, you're too tired, or you're too wired. All of these things can come up. And so when we notice repetitively that we're getting caught up by certain things, then we have to investigate them, and we have to start applying techniques like we did with the meal. It's like, okay, yeah, I tend to lose myself when I've got a bowl of food in front of me. So maybe I'll count the bites, and okay, so then you're there and you're practicing. Eventually you get to the point where you don't lose yourself in the food, because you're like, oh man, it's so much chewing to eat this bowl of food. I'm just, okay, I got to get through it or I'll waste away. But there won't be any enjoyment. Just thinking of all of the different ways you see people trying to adjust, like I was talking about, to dukkha, to try to get rid of it. And like I was noting this morning, how we've got a space that is totally adequate for 3 grown men. Right here on this shag carpet here, what is it, like 8 by 6? Something like that. And nevertheless, that's okay for like an hour sitting. But for a 2-day retreat, when you start putting schedule and pressure on, our need for personal space starts to expand, and it's not enough room for 3 grown men. And we've been doing kind of musical chairs with our sitting cloths. And this morning, Anagarika Drew said, "Well, you know, if musical chairs wasn't fun, then it wouldn't be a game. Like it wouldn't be a thing. So maybe this is a game." And I thought it was a very interesting reflection, because that's exactly what we see happening. Dukkha, or pain, is really the counterpoint of rati, or delight. And when we delight in something, when we become accustomed to something, we're signing a contract that says, and with the absence of this thing, I'm going to feel pain. And we sign that contract because this is fun. We like this. This is a good thing. The exact same thing in a different context is painful, is suffering. And so it is, when we arrive in the practice and we arrive in the training, we start with the basics. We start with sila. Don't steal from the fridge. Don't tell lies. Don't come here drunk. Basic stuff. And then it's like, okay, we'll turn off the devices. We'll listen to the wind. We'll spend more time in meditation. And finally, it's like, yeah, okay, we're all here for the same thing. We want to be free. It's up to each of us. Nobody is checking in on our minds. Nobody knows what we're thinking. But do we want to develop? It's really up to us. And then we practice mindfulness. And the contentment part is to notice that even doing all that, there might be obstacles, and nobody said that training was to be without obstacles. It's training. It's like learning to do anything. And sometimes we have to expand our capacity to be okay with the present situation. Sometimes we do that through figuring out what we've been delighting in or taking for granted and sort of working with it. And this is not sense restraint, but this is where the idea of dieting comes in. This is where the idea of like watching less movies, or sleeping on a bed that's not as fluffy, or waking up a little earlier. This is where these ideas come in, because that's the only way we could arrive in that same situation later and be okay. Is if we practice on removing the delight in that thing. So this is where the idea of devotion to wakefulness comes up. The 8th precept is to not use high or luxurious furniture. And that the basic idea is, if you did, why would you do that? It's for the delight of having all that comfort of kind of sinking in and not having to use a single muscle. So maybe your clicker finger. But that delight, on the flip side, when you're sitting on some buckwheat hulls on a hard floor, is going to be dukkha. So how do you work with that? Well, first you say, okay, well, I'm just not going to use the big super fluffy stuff. I'm going to use a more simple chair. I'm going to use a more simple bed. It doesn't have to be a 4-post bed with 3 mattresses. Maybe I'll bring it down to 2, and then maybe down to 1. Because we really do start out, and it's like the Princess and the Pea, right? You know, I arrived at the monastery, and I said, I cannot sleep without a pillow, because I had heard that in Thailand the monks sleep on hardwood floors with a wooden block as their pillow, and I'm like, you will kill me. I cannot do it. And a few years later, I was just living in a hermitage with two other bhikkhus, and we had just been working, and we had been moving the monastery from one property to the next, and we were just dog tired. And one day I saw we came in from alms rounds, and we had a little time before we were going to eat together. And one of the monks, he came in, and he just like a cat, he just kind of like walked in a circle around this part of a wooden floor, like a bare wooden floor, and he just curled up and immediately went to sleep. And I'm like, oh, the reason I couldn't sleep with a pillow is because I had never known true exhaustion. If you're actually tired, you don't need anything. You're just going to sleep. And that, it really woke me up to the fact that that's what our lives are like, is we've been cushioning ourselves to try to avoid dukkha. And getting to the place of okay with everything is to start one by one, gradually removing the cushions and seeing, can you be with what arises? And so just deciding to do a meditation retreat is like a, we pat ourselves on the back, because so many people don't even get this far, like just to agree to the structure of being in this one place all day, when so many people in this country will, barely spend a few hours in the home that they own because they work here, and they go out to eat, and they go visit so and so, and they go for a walk. To be in one spot for a day, that's an undertaking. It puts some pressure on the mind until there's no more pressure, until you're like, no, this is pretty cool, it's pretty relaxing, it's a nice place, peaceful. And then there's no pressure. And so contentment, the development deals with clothing, food, shelter, and medicine. And we work with all of these. We begin looking like, how can I be okay with what I've got right now? And we have a fantastic meal. Nevertheless, you can be thinking about tea time. You can be thinking about the little chocolate niblets that are over there. This can come up in meditation. But there can be a point when it doesn't. When you say, oh, yeah, no, I had a really good meal. And then nothing else follows. There's like, oh, I guess I don't have to think about food because you're okay. Now, you won't be okay in 24 hours, but for right now, you're okay. You're within the threshold of what you can be comfortable with. And likewise with where we're sitting and how we're sitting. And as the retreat develops, you see people get more and more the aches and more the pains. And what starts is everybody arriving on time and sitting diligently right up until the bell becomes everybody's fearing the cushion, like, because that's where the back pain is. It's not in the back, it's on the cushion. That's when I'm sitting there, that's where the pain arises. And that becomes our kind of crucible. But over time, you begin to kind of work your way into it. You may have bad knees, and it may be that you have to change your posture before the bell. But you practice. Every now and then, you're going to get your second wind, and you're going to be like, no, I bet I could do it this time. And so you try. And what happens is you might find contentment along the way, but you can never find it unless you're willing to experiment. You're willing to remove the extra cushion. And I've had this image in my mind all day of the Lincoln Memorial. I don't know if you've seen the Lincoln Memorial. You get a really tall guy. It's a statue. It's a really tall guy on a really big Maha chair. And he's got his arms are like up here. And I've seen people in the Insight Meditation Society, they're in a pillow fort. basically to do their meditation, and they look like they're in their Lincoln in the Lincoln Memorial with all of the cushions. And it's like, wow, yeah. Sometimes that's where we start, and that's, I mean, it gave me a giggle fit. You know, it was hard not to have that image come to mind for weeks after. But that's, sometimes it's really just removing one cushion at a time, and wherever we start. But then I can say from experience with the gradual training, if you do it and you get to this point, I can't guarantee that in any short time you will arrive at samadhi, you will arrive at this blissful feeling of being totally okay with everything, of having clear mindfulness and just relaxed sense of trust and love for everyone around you, and just being totally okay with everything. I can't guarantee it. Actually, I can't guarantee it within the first few years of your practice. There was once a young monk who went up to his teacher and said, you know, okay, I've been at this a little while, and I'm wondering, how long will it take me to get to stream entry? And stream entry is this point of enlightenment where you understand what needs to be done, and you're going to continue in a linear path towards enlightenment. It might take time, but because you know what needs to be done, you're going to do it, and you're going to get there. You're guaranteed to get there sooner or later. And the young monk said, you know, teacher, you know, how long will it take me? And the teacher hardly even looks at him, and he's like, 5 years, and just goes back. And like, I've heard this repeated throughout the Buddhist tradition, and that's hard for an American, you know, 5 years. It's like, no, you don't understand. And so this young monk said, oh, Ajahn, no. I think you misunderstood. I'm willing to really work at it. Like, I'm gonna fast, you know, every other day. I'm gonna cut my meal portions down to nothing. I'm gonna sleep only the bare minimum, you know, an hour or two a night. I'm gonna wear just the 3 robes. You know, I'm not gonna use a blanket when it gets cold. I'm gonna sit 8 to 10 hours a day. I really want to get this. You know, I want to have this in the bag. And you know, the teacher like, oh, sorry, you're right. I did misunderstand. 10 years. And that's what it likes. So contentment is not the first thing we start cultivating. It's not the first thing we should expect from the mind. First, we get a feel for what is that track where we're not putting pressure on the mind. When we start to investigate, what is that track where the sila, the precepts, are not hard? And then we're like, okay, well, let's follow this track a bit further. Where's this place where the sense restraint is not a problem, where I'm staying with my body, where I'm staying with my ears, where I'm staying with my eyes, and I'm not getting lost in fantasy. And we find that place where it's not a struggle, where we don't have to try. And so we keep following it. And now somewhere down the line, we'll be like, you know, I could really be mindful if my back wasn't hurting. And now we're like, oh, okay. I could really be mindful if I had gotten a bit more at the meal. I mean, I wish I could practice today, but I hardly got any sleep. My tent was dripping on me. Because these things happen. And I could say that the first few times you get up the next morning anyway. And this is one of the joys of monasticism, is it doesn't matter. The bell rings at 6. So whether you got 8 hours of sleep or whether you got 8 minutes of sleep, you still get up, because sleep is a fruitless state. Yeah. And you're just like, okay, that was awful. That doesn't happen every night. So I'll try again tomorrow. And sooner or later, it gets to the point where you've really paid your dues, and you know, the ceiling starts to drip, and you scoot over and you go back to sleep. Just no big deal. Yeah, I'll deal with it in the morning, because there'll always be more chores. Or you go out on alms round and see 15 people drive by. They all wave and they're all smiling. And they're like, oh, there's a monk in our town again. This is so wonderful. But none of them stop. You go the alms round and you end up with nothing in your bowl. Can you be like, that was really awesome. I got 15 waves. And can you be full? Yeah. It doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen eventually if you've been willing to go there, to go to that place where, well, maybe this time I'm not gonna eat till I'm full. Maybe this time I'm not gonna sleep 8 hours. Maybe this time I am not going to put on the jacket immediately, or maybe I'm not going to take it off immediately. You notice we're wearing all these robes even when it gets hot. Yeah, we're wearing these robes even when it gets cold. It's part of the training. And when you don't have to react to the environment, that's contentment, that's freedom. And that's the greatest kind of freedom. And past this, there's really nothing. Past this, there's just sort of gaining that momentum. If you've developed all this part of the gradual training and you're still not getting samadhi, just keep at it, because you've set all the conditions. They just have to ripen. Yeah, there's nothing else on the list. All right. So that'll be the last reflection I offer. But also, I imagine you'll have some reflections to offer on the matter. And so, just like yesterday, very happy to hear what people thought, what people have been working with. What they think they might try one day because of some of the things that have been suggested. Anything. It's all good. Oh, that's right. Mm-hmm. Friends online. What's that? You get some friends online. Friends with Sienna who offered all the food.
Pretty sure I am not as reactive about conditions as I was 5 years ago.
Mm.
Like, say, the weather or interactions with people. But I'm happy not to take it further.
Mm.
I see what you guys deal with. There's not the desire to take it further. Like, yes, I'm a greedy type. I like comfort. I like food. But also, I think it would put me in a state of disorientation that could freak me out. Like I noticed in the market this week, many people were back in masks. And, I just immediately had this fear reaction, even though rationally, like, I had a mask in my purse. I talked about this. So I could see, being in a situation where I took less food or less comfort or, those things. What are blankies, the blankies we have in life. and took less sleep. Oh my God.
Mhm.
It would have to be like really gradual. They're like my tipping point
Mhm.
is when it goes, it goes.
Mhm. Yeah, it got me thinking. Montezsuma's very lucky. He got his character type pointed out to him early, and he said, as a greedy type. Yeah, like you said, Irene. But there's another way of framing those. The other name for that type is the faith type. And I think it's really reflective of the tremendous amount of faith it takes to give up anything at all when that's your character type, when that's the inclination of your mind. You know this thing will make you happy, and yet you're willing to take it on faith that something that exists without that thing could make you more happy. Yeah, it takes tremendous faith to figure out where it's safe to make the little sacrifices. Yeah, well, it's why it's really important that we don't. This is Ajahn V said, "Don't should all over ourselves. I should be practicing harder. I should be eating less. I should be sleeping less. I should be, you know, not to do it, but to, look like where is it safe to do it? Is it safe to work? Like if we were coming in from alms round and we're walking alms round multiple days in a row, and we get so much in our bowl, well, we could, maybe I'll eat a bit less, or maybe I won't eat everything I got, but we don't know. We don't know what we're going to get the next day. But if we're here in a retreat center environment where we know there's going to be food, that's totally safe to play because we can experiment and we know we're going to eat tomorrow. Yeah. So when it comes to things like life and death, a pandemic racing through the population, yeah, maybe that's not the place where we're experimenting. We could have some compassion for ourselves and be like, okay, yeah, no, that's too much. But,
It's interesting because one of the, I guess it was a piece of advice, maybe just a reflection, but that I heard when I started going to monasteries was especially for people who like comfort. I'm one of those people. I've been, Drew knows that I talk about showers a lot. Like, there's no shower at the camp. What am I gonna do? Not because of like even the hot water element of it, but there's just something about showering. But like, I like to smell good, and, all of that. But one of the pieces of advice that I got was that all of the things, at least that I was worried about, say, giving up or letting go of or limiting, it's like, oh, you can always go back to them, actually. They'll be there. Showers will be there, maybe not where I am, but, candy will be there, TV is there, whatever it is that I thought I would lose by going to the monastery, I actually didn't lose at all. In some ways, they're just waiting, actually, for one to go back to. But instead, what I was cultivating was that intention or element of choice, or I was willingly putting something down, even though I knew I could easily pick it back up again. just that like shift took away some of the fear, I guess, where it was like, oh yeah, I'm going to lose the ability to do X, Y, Z. But that was just like a story I was telling myself that made it. Well, I like drama, so it was a very fun story. But also, it was a story that discouraged me from trying to give something up, and something small. So, like, I've been used to, yeah, 3 mattress beds, and then moving to a monastery. We still had mattresses, the first few monasteries I visited, but it was just a single mattress. And then I remember one monastery I went to, it was just the wooden like platform. And I was like, oh my God. But then I tried that, and after a couple of days, it was all right. Then eventually now I'm quite comfortable sleeping just on the floor with like a yoga mat or a sleeping bag or something. And it's interesting to look back and be like, oh yeah, I used to be one of those 3 mattress people. And if I told myself, oh, one day you'll be able to just sleep on the floor, maybe just on a carpet. And pillows now too, I've been saying, oh, that pillow's too thick. I can't use that pillow. Now I don't sleep with pillows because it hurts. So it's interesting how there's the idea of, I guess, how I thought things would be if I gave something up and how it actually is. But also realizing that through that, it wasn't like this sudden like jumping, from eating 3 meals a day to now eating 1 meal a day, but rather it was just little by little dipping in, dipping out, trying and moving in a certain direction to find that track, like Tom mentioned, where it's not painful, it's not overindulgent. It starts to feel just right, but then seeing that just right actually changes over time. And it brings to mind a story in the discourses of a monk named Sona, who was very enthusiastic about the practice and really wanted to attain stream entry in a couple of days, basically. And he would do walking meditation until his feet bled. And the Buddha saw this and was like, what's going on? His feet are bleeding, he's crying. And he's like, I'm really trying to practice hard. I want to attain enlightenment ASAP. And the Buddha was like, it's not going to happen that way because you're practicing, you're too high strung, basically. And he gave him the simile of how a musician plays a lute, plays it very beautifully. This monk, Sona, used to be a musician, so he would understand the metaphor. And if it's too tightly wound, then it sounds off because it's too tense. And in his case, the practice was too strained. But also, if it's too loose, then you won't produce the beautiful melody that you're aiming for. And so he was telling this to the monk to say, find what's just right, or find that sweet spot where if you were playing an instrument like you did, it would sound beautifully. Also where you're practicing, and you're practicing in a way where you don't feel anger or aversion. You're not whipping yourself on the back, but you're also not sleeping the day away or indulging too much. And that's been useful for me because I found that even, say, as a greedy type, if you will, there's also the pleasure in a way of pushing yourself too far. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to give everything up. I'm going to attain jhana in a month then, because if I can't just have what I want, then I won't have anything at all. Drama. But then even that is just another manifestation of the mind that just wants something and wants it now. But being content with just where we are and where we're at, I found is very useful, because then that leads to actually being able to do something that has longevity, that you can do year after year after year. So yeah, I don't think you have to throw out your bed per se, but just see where those places are that you can do something different, even if it's just for one day not watching TV, for one day not eating dinner. That's actually, sometimes we reflect that even people who follow the 5 precepts are doing better than like most of the world's population. So even in that, you're giving up a lot. And that's worthy of respect.
I was thinking about, not in the same, I can't think of the word, but with my children, with my grandchildren, there's that losing the ability to sit and savor the cup of coffee as long as I want, or, there's the having to get up when they get up. And at the end of the day, that often feels freeing, when it's not irritable. But no, it does feel freeing because it feels like it's coming out of love. It's a giving that, so it's different than, what you're suggesting, or, what the teachings are suggesting, which is, doing it in a way. It's really about you, or a path. But if that path felt to me like it feels to just give over to those kids, then that would be a way to enter it.
Yeah, it got me thinking. You talked about how you have gotten less reactive over the years. You have gotten less attached, less irritable. And how much of that was because you were given a situation and you just had to deal with it. So it's like you didn't create a situation, but nevertheless the situations arose anyway. And I think that's, so you have like the Arahant who practices like their head is on fire and gets it in one life. You get the stream enterer who gets there, but it takes them up to 7 lifetimes. And it's like, what would be the difference in their approach? Stream enterer's like, no, I'm not giving anything up. And then their house burns down. I didn't give that up willingly.
Yeah, no, I think in part it's also, if you taste sitting, if you taste a state of not being agitated, then you have a reference point. You can just say, oh, I'm getting angry now, this doesn't feel good. And back away from that.
It's interesting how, like you mentioned, there is an element of the practice that seems very individual. But actually the situation we're in right now, the 3 of us living together, there's a group of monks in the discourses. I forget their names. Kimbala is one of them, Anuruddha and Nanda. These 3 monks who are living, just the 3 of them, in like this little small community, if you will. And it's always a very beautiful sutta to reflect on, because it's a sutta actually about friendship and supporting one another's practice. And one of the monks says, I often reflect, why don't I put aside what I want to do and do what my spiritual companions want to do? So there's also that element of actually giving up what you want for the sake of someone else, but knowing that by doing that, you're actually also increasing your own virtue and wholesome qualities. So there's that element of like the stuff that one is doing perhaps for their own practice, but then that element of community, no matter how small, is also an important part too. And one can see how even just thinking in that way, you're able to let go of a lot. You're able to see things from someone else's perspective. You're able to understand someone else better, and how instead of the mind becoming very like tight, I have to do what I need to do so that I can attain enlightenment, that your perspective, or at least my experience has been, my perspective broadens, where you're looking after yourself, but then you're also looking after other people as well. And I found that in doing that, weirdly enough too, that's like an element for me of renunciation, where everything that I do is not just about me, but also, I could just skip puja this morning. I don't want to. But then, how would that affect other people in the community? Or, if I know how to do something, how can I offer that skill to help out? Or even when Drew went looking for me today, something like that. Or making sure Tom has everything that he needs. So there's these ways that we can support one another that I found anyway also support my practice. And it's intangible, which I feel like is maybe why it's not spoken about so much. And it doesn't fit nicely into the nibbana or bust way of going about the practice. But it's essential, I think.
Any thoughts? Okay. Anything? Mhm. So we've still got some of the afternoon left, and there's a phenomena with retreats where when you're beginning the retreat, your mind is thinking of all the things it just came from. It's like all the things that you had to tidy up and all the things that you were working on. And when you get near the end of the retreat, the mind starts to think of the things you want to do. And when you're doing a weekend retreat, it's almost like, oh, what the heck? It's like there's not enough time that you can get away from one end, the beginning or the end of the retreat. But nevertheless, contentment is also that which applies to like, oh yeah, totally, I'll be able to do that later. I've got this little bit of time left. I don't have to think about what I'll do. I don't have to plan. I don't have to anticipate. I can just milk this for everything it's worth. And so that's what we got. It could be just 3 more hours until pizza, or it can be, just 3 more hours, and then we'll worry about it. Right? Okay. So let's do a little bit of walking meditation, and we will. Can come back at 4:30.
I'm gonna go off to my highest four-legged gorilla. Thanks for the retreat.
It's been great having you. Yeah. And we'll see you around.
Now I'm wedded to you three guys. Oh no, are they eating?